We put together a personal media day now. The idea and problem of multitasking is seen as a terrible influence in what that day looks like. Too many stimuli for competing for limited attention, causing thoughtlessness, if not stupidity, and at least bad grades and probably a few car accidents. But multitasking is turning into something new. It's not going away, but it's turning into something new, and that's what I'd like to talk about today. So for those of you that were downstairs in the Hive, here is something that we looked at in the Hive as well as other places. This is every 5-second screenshots from a Stanford undergraduate for a week. We didn't get the whole week in one view in the Hive, but it is not multitasking, it is task switching. Undergraduates at Stanford, and if you listen to the executives of cable companies and their worries, people are more and more putting content, lots of it, on single devices, namely two important screens, our telephone and our laptop computer. So what we're doing in this research that I'm going to talk about is logging the screenshots, going through lots of human subjects discussions, privacy discussions to get the research, and we're sending students out with their laptops with this logging software to go about their normal week. So what they're doing is not choosing, or they are not primarily, for our analyses, not primarily choosing which screen they will look at, but they are actively deciding which frame or which window will be active on the screen of choice, namely their laptops. So when you do this, you get lots of data. And you get hundreds of thousands, and now we're into the millions of screenshots, even for tens of people, because we're looking at these moment-by-moment changes. So we're experimenting with different ways to look at the data. I thought I'd just right up front share one of the ways that we're doing this. You might be able to, or might not be able to guess exactly what this is, but each row from left to right is one of 30 subjects. And the different colors, the little bars, are segments of experience on a laptop computer compiled contiguously over the course of 5 days. And different colors, you can make this happen any way you want, but different colors represent different things that people are doing on the laptop. Blue is entertainment stuff, watching Netflix. No one has a TV in the dorm, watching Netflix, looking at YouTubes. Orange is doing work, homework, chemistry, writing a paper. Red is doing email. And there's some other, the yellow in there is what we're calling services, and it's mostly search, maybe ordering food, but kind of arranging life. And there's some black in there that indicates segments. But you can make a couple conclusions about what might be going on for people as this single device becomes the place where a lot of different media are converging. So one thing you can look at is that this line right here, this person right here with a lot of blue is having a lot of fun. There's a lot of entertainment. The person right below them is probably not having enough fun. They're working and doing email a lot. So you can make that kind of a conclusion. But there's a lot of switching that's happening, task switching that's happening between radically different content. And then the other thing you can look at here is and say, my goodness, we've only got 30 in this particular analysis, but people are really different. These lines are really different. They're doing a lot of different things. So people are different, and media and life experiences, this is another important part that I'll emphasize here, are divided up throughout the week in lots of different ways. There's not the whole package that we would like to consider. The movie, the chemistry homework, the Netflix, whatever it is, that whole package is being ripped up and scattered throughout the week with lots of things coming between it. So this is my history of media. You know, we've gone from these large chunks that have identifiable beginnings and endings and little technology that can make it otherwise, to ways to time shift content, to stop things and to get things to come in between, to something now that is a lot more atomized chunks. And the atomized chunks, because this content is changing in the z-axis, not in the x and y-axis. I'm not being bombarded by screens. It's changing in relation to whatever I want the order to be, for good or bad reasons. I decide I don't want the Netflix movie. I want Mary Beth's Facebook page, or I want my homework. Enough of that homework. I want something else. So there's a lot of activity that's going on in there. And it's not going on, I mean, I said it's not going on in these discrete units. There's a lot of psychological dissolve that's happening between these really short, I'll get to how short, segments of experience. So it's blending. And so you've got two things almost in the same sense as a filmic dissolve. You've got two things impinging on experience and your brain that are overlapped, that are confusing each other. So what do we look at when we put it up in the Hive, and we try to look at all these different pictures, and we try to get some sense that we might not be able to get if we immediately go to the time series analysis or the highly quantitative part of this. But you end up with these lots of little pictures. This is done by a colleague who's actually led and participated in this research, a PhD student at Stanford named Leo Yeklis. And also James Cummings in the communication department has worked on this as well. But you get these tiny little pictures that you can then analyze with respect to this notion of task switching. What are people doing? Okay, so just a couple results, and I want to talk about some implications of this. So let me have you in your mind, if not shout out, and you know this is, I'm looking for a small number by the nature of the talk. Think in your mind, what is likely the segment length for a sophomore at Stanford that is experiencing a whole lot of life and a lot more than 5 or 10 years ago on this single laptop computer? So a segment is defined by when you switch from an active frame or window to something else. So you go through these hundreds of thousands of switches, and you can make some parameter estimates, albeit for a small group and a bunch of weird Stanford students, not necessarily representative of even all of us here, let alone the world. But what is the average segment length? The median segment length is 19 seconds. 19 seconds. And I just want to keep reminding you of this. These are arguably some of the most accomplished 20-year-old, 21-year-olds in the country, doing very well, writing papers, maybe not as well as they would if they quit doing this, some might argue, but a lot of them are being quite successful, but they are experiencing media and a lot of life in really small chunks. And you can see that, oh, I didn't even put that up. So 19 seconds, and a lot of these segments, I mean, most of them, 75% of them are less than a minute. A lot of them are less than 5 seconds. But that's all it takes to see if Mary Beth really did post a new picture of the party last Saturday and then get back to organic chemistry. But that's how it goes. There's a long tail on that. There are, on this distribution, there are 10, and you can find 1 hour, maybe even a 90-minute or so Netflix segment that is uninterrupted. We don't know if they went out to the bathroom. We don't know if they talked on the phone while they were doing this. There are a lot of qualifications to make of this, but I think it's a wake-up for us, anyway, in thinking about how people are unitizing life as this technology enables us to use these features. I mean, these are the critical features that enable this task switching and enables us to construct a personal experience that may not be the experience that the person or people or company making this package intended us to use. So these buttons allow me to construct, for better and worse, my story, not necessarily your story, Mr. Media, or Mr. Professor who's wants me to do my homework from start to end, and it takes an hour and don't be doing anything in between. So one important implication is this: we are moving, I think, to more active selection of material and less passive automaticity that happens with a lot of multitasking situations, and that certainly those still exist. The phone rings while I'm doing this, I answer the phone, I'm talking on the phone, I'm watching this over here. So there still is multiple stimuli that are competing, but a lot of the competition is being actively adjudicated by my own decisions here. Okay, so one of the things we want to do is, in addition to logging these screenshots, figure out why people switch when they do. Why do they do this? So it's hard to, remember, this is research that I've done for 25 years in the lab, now out in the wild. So it's take the laptop, we put the software on it, go to your dorm, do whatever you're going to do. And the other thing, and for a couple of our studies that we want you to do, is wear this, which is a physiological, an ambulatory physiological recording device that you wrap around your wrist that's measuring signals that we think are interesting, like heart rate, acceleration, deceleration, skin conductance levels, which are an indication of the amount of arousal or system activation that's happening. And so we're able to take the same time, these are 12 people for that same time period for multiple days, and we're able to look at the second by second up and downness of this signal that a literature tells us is pretty interesting. It indicates how aroused, how activated you are to process information. So you can start to look at the relationship of these moment-by-moment changes in the frame and moment-by-moment changes in not a subjective response, but a physical indicator. You've got to take this off when you go to the pool, when you take a shower, but otherwise they're putting it back on and we're able to get this data. So in this right here, a lot of detail here, but the red is where when the computer is on, the black is when you're doing something else. So I mean, you can get aroused throwing the Frisbee out in the lawn, certainly. And there's a lot of control to be done of this physical signature. But let me show you a couple interesting results that happen when you try to figure out why people change the way they do. One of the things that we have always thought about in my lab, or the lab work that we've done about arousal, is media. You've got a blank screen, pow, media is on, and especially if it's sex and violence or whatever, something compelling, arousal goes up, and it starts to go in about 3 seconds, stays up for about 5 to 7 seconds, and then starts trailing off right at the onset of the picture, because that's how we usually think of media. Look at this. And it's just thrown in your visual space. But now we've got a signal that anticipates the switch. This black line right here is when the switch happens. This blue line right here is the level of arousal up to 20 seconds before and 20, 30 seconds afterward. And what you can see is something's happening before the switch. It's not, look at this, it's typing away on that paper. God, this is hard to write. One more sentence, and then I get to check Mary Beth's Facebook page. And while I'm thinking about that, arousal goes up in anticipation of what's coming next. And maybe there are, I mean, that might even be a cheery scenario. There may be less cheery, or ones that we would think are less valuable. But there's some activity involved in this, which is a very different way to think about media than we have in the past. Here's the same arousal line when you move from different kinds of content. So this is moving from work to play. So you get the same kind of anticipation. I'm working away, homework, and I'm thinking about what's going to happen right here, because remember, I've got to do that. It's not like the television producer decides to go to camera 3. I've got to make that switch. So I make that, arousal goes up right after that switch and then starts going down in the typical pattern that you might see if you just started an experiment right here. So work to play, play to work. The regression line kind of goes the other way. I'm playing and I'm thinking, okay, I'm feeling guilty. Maybe I don't have enough work in the bank to justify the continuance of that. So arousal is actually dropping off here. And then there are just lots of different ways you can analyze this to try to figure out what it is, what the motivational changes are, or reasons for change in a data set like this, and a lot of different things to do. So let me talk just a little bit about why we think this might happen. How can we start to understand the differences in how people construct media experiences? One way, so I've always gone theoretically to interest in primitive responses. It's not to say that these evolutionarily constrained primitive places in our brain are the only thing that control life for us. There's a lot of good thinking that happens as well, but I'm very interested, and we are very interested in thinking about primitive reasons why this change occurs. And we've started to think of the switching that's happening in this environment where everything is possible through this one little filter as a hunting exercise. We're going hunting. Let's find some good stuff. Let's do the hunt. And when you think about, when you read about the hunt and read about the amount of our current life that is very much like hunting, whether it's looking for friends or a mate, or negotiating food and a place to live, or just a lot of different other aspects of life, people talk about two different systems that are important in this hunting. And these are traits of people that people most of the time exhibit, like a personality. But there are systems that we have that control both offense and defense. A good hunter has got an offense and maybe even a bias toward the offense, because get out, you got to get out, you got to get out of the cave, got to go, got to look, got to see what's available. And you've got to be geared toward looking for danger. So you've got to be good at defense as well. So you've got to keep yourself out of difficult places. So there's a carrot kind of and a stick. And these are appetitive systems, moving toward, and aversive systems that are allowing us to evaluate and flee danger. So that it turns out that that individuals are biased toward one or the other. And that most of us here have one of four categories. The first two, we're biased kind of toward offense. Come on out, let's go. Hell with the risk. Or we're biased toward, well, I don't think I want to go. I kind of want to stay in here and minimize any troubles that are having. And then there are other people who do both. We say they are coactive. These systems are coactive. They've got a lot of offense and a lot of defense. And then there are people that have little of either. So here's a look at, or we're starting to look at all that hunting that I showed you that's happening for these different categories of people, and a couple of quick results. So this is, this is the approach activation. So if I'm really always kind of going toward people high or low, and I'm really more defensive, high or low here. So a couple things to say. So risk takers are all approach and no defense. Those are the risk takers. They look at a lot of content, and I'm not sure I got this well, but my intention was to get these little stripes to be much narrower than these stripes up here in the other quadrants. They're taking a look, going to the next one, going to the next one. So they're much shorter segments. Kind of interesting. A lot of defense and not much offense. So risk avoiders. They're spending less total time doing anything on their computers, regardless of any switching strategy they might have. People that have high activation in both, and we measure this activation, you can measure it in terms of reliable physiology as well as questions that you can ask of people subjectively. We've done both of those. These coactive people have the longest session lengths. They're out there looking around a lot. And there's a lot of interesting literature on the advantage of having this coactive trait. And then the inactives, who are really no offense, no defense, have the most sessions. They're kind of short, but they open it up, kind of close it, come back, go away, come back, open it up, close it, come back. So some pretty interesting differences in how people hunt media. And then we're experimenting with different, these are analyses that, that I've never done or anyone in my lab has ever done. But this is, the students label this the Jellyfish Analysis, which is looking at each of these being individual people. How long does it go? How many switches do you have to put in to get to a certain cumulative time? So in 5,000 switches, this blue line here has probably got 3.5. In 50,000 seconds, I'm sorry, has got about 350 switches. So we kind of look at this. So some really interesting individual differences. But when you put these 30 people out here, in spite of all the individual difference that we'd like to see and the reliable differences in categories of people, because that's kind of theoretically elegant and we can generalize. I don't have to have a theory about every seat in this room. I can have a theory about 4 categories of people or whatever it is. When you look at this, you're struck with there's still a lot of variance to explain in what's happening when you get done with all these individual differences. So these are all individual people. And just as the first colored slide I showed you, there's a lot happening. There are just too many choices in media. Too many configurations of how to get from this website to that homework. I mean, just too many ways that this could happen. And there's a group of us, a couple different universities, and especially a colleague named Nalam Ram at Penn State. He's a mathematical psychologist who did this picture. He is interested if what I just said is true, if every seat in here is different. There's some difference in what kind of hunting style you have, but if everything really is different, we may need to go to an entirely different way of modeling how this happens. And so this is his picture to demonstrate this. Is there, I can't even remember how many, 50? No, something like that, 75 or somebody will count. Pictures that are subjects that were in his experiment, an experiment he did. They came in, they'd put their right hand down, he'd take a picture of it. And he'd say, you can go through this, and if the lights were out here, you could actually see, you could tell race and age and gender and maybe occupation. You get a whole lot of great information. But what do we often do as psychologists or just data analysts in any area? We often average everything, and that's this cell right here. So if you average all the pictures, you get this picture, which is good for how many fingers do humans have, but it's not good for any of that other variance. So there's a group of us that are pretty interested in trying to model individuals. So we need a regression equation or a mathematical model for every seat in here. And this is just the personalized medicine of media analysis. You still have tons of degrees of freedom for you statisticians. You know, I've got hundreds of thousands of pictures for any chair here. So lots of data, but I'm looking at it one at a time. And what we're really interested in is, especially if you want to create a media intervention that might change a behavior, that might respond to some health risk or educational opportunity, you need to know moment by moment what each individual is doing. So, you know, following this arousal level, linking it to that picture, and then bam, look at this, read this, or whatever the intervention is. But a lot of us very interested in using this to actually create media interventions that are unique to individuals. Okay, so I'm going to summarize here. The task switching summary, not the multitasking summary. So the first thing I said was media experiences are constructed in ever smaller time units. You know, this is my history of media, and especially even in the last couple of years. The units can vary radically between different content, and they're actively constructed by individuals, not necessarily imposed. And the one other thing I'd really like to emphasize as a summary is that this notion that traditional commercial and educational categories of experience are just broken up and scattered in the day. When you say my chemistry homework or my Spanish paper, this was one I just actually looked at, we looked at this week, my Spanish paper, it is scattered throughout this. Because it's look at the assignment on the website, check a Facebook page, adjust the volume in iTunes, write the first sentence, go to the chat with a friend to see, well, what do you think this guy wants us to write about? Come back, maybe write something else, go to something else. So it's just broken up and scattered. Now, if you can put it back together without any psychological loss in explaining what happened, you're fine, but I don't think you can do that at all. So, and then the last thing I'll say is that as we think about this, is this good or bad? And I think the multitasking jury is pretty much in, at least among my colleagues, some of them in the room right here, Roy. The jury is in. Multitasking is a kind of a bad thing. We're just making bad judgments. It's too hard to re-engage every few seconds as different things occupy our attention. And as one of my beloved colleagues said, it's making us stupider. It's just really a bad thing. But it may be different to talk about task switching than multitasking. On the good side, when we switch, it's an action we take, so there's some activity here. It's not as passive or automatic. We may pay a little less attention in an organized fashion to any given task, but we may also do more, for better and worse. But if you did 10 tasks, 80% as good as you could do them if that was the only thing you did in that time segment, you get a lot more done. Maybe any one of those things you got done not as well as you could do if you solely concentrated on it. But you get the other thing that's happening this is more anecdotal. When you go away from that Spanish paper, which is really hard to write, probably not only cognitively difficult, maybe a little dull. The assignment kind of looked a little dull. And you go out and you check Mary Beth's Facebook page, you come back a little bit more aroused, and maybe that excitation actually transferred to, oh, I got an idea. I'll write this. So the re-entry, the number of times, and there's some neuroscience about this, also the number of times you exit and re-enter a problem, there may be some advantage. But all of this evidence, I think, that media are not good or bad. Media are powerful. So one pill may help you and two may kill you. So switch wisely. That's it.